Welcome to History in 6, a place where we sample history in 6-minute increments. I'm your host, Tim Lindell. Today in our journey through the American Revolutionary War, we're going to look at the Battle of Bennington. Time is short, let's jump into it. Summer of 1777 burned hot with ambition for British General John Burgoyne. His grand campaign was underway. Burgoyne aimed to carve a path south through Canada, down the strategic highway of Lake Champlain, Hudson River, all the way to Albany, New York. There, he expected to join forces with General Sir William Howe marching north from New York City, and Colonel Barry St. Leger driving east from Lake Ontario through the Mohawk Valley. This three-pronged pincer movement was designed to sever New England, the heart of the rebellion, from the rest of the colonies, strangling the American fight for independence. Intended as a decisive blow. At first, fortune seemed to favor Burgoyne. His army, a formidable mix of British regulars, German mercenaries, Canadians, and indigenous allies, captured the vital American fortress of Fort Ticonderoga with almost shocking ease in early July. But the wilderness of upstate New York soon proved a more formidable opponent than anticipated. Burgoyne's advance south towards the Hudson River slowed to a crawl. American General Philip Schuyler skillfully employed delaying tactics. His men felled massive trees across the few rough tracks that passed for roads, destroyed bridges, and stripped the countryside bare, forcing the British to hack their way forward inch by painstaking inch. Burgoyne's supply line, stretching precariously back to Canada, became dangerously overextended. His army, deep in hostile territory, began to become hungry. Word reached Burgoyne's camp near Fort Edward of a substantial American supply depot located in Bennington, Vermont. Intelligence suggested that the depot was overflowing with horses, cattle, wagons, food, precisely the resources his beleaguered army needed. Critically, Burgoyne was led to believe the depot was only lightly guarded, perhaps by fewer than 400 militia. This seemed like an opportunity too good to pass up. He tasked Lieutenant Colonel Baum, a German officer commanding Brunswick Dragoons, with leading the expedition. Baum's orders, however, went far beyond a simple supply run. Burgoyne envisioned a multi-purpose mission. First, Baum was to test the loyalty of the inhabitants, hoping to rally loyalist support. Second, he was to disrupt American organization in the region. Third, to seize enough horses to transform his dismounted German cavalrymen into an effective mounted force. And fourth, he was instructed to bolster the ranks of his loyalist troops with local recruits. Finally, and perhaps most pressingly, he was to obtain large supplies of cattle, horses, carriages. Lieutenant Colonel Baum's command was a diverse international force numbering 700 to 800 men, Germans, regulars, loyalists, Canadians, and Iroquois Indians. This mixed force, however, was poorly equipped for the task at hand. The Brunswick Dragoons, which were the heart of the unit, were dismounted. They trudged through the summer heat in rough terrain clad in their heavy, traditional European cavalry uniforms, which were thick woolen coats, cumbersome tall boots, heavy sabers which were designed for mounted combat. But in fact, the primary objective of the mission was in fact to find horses for them, leaving them ineffective, hampered by their inappropriate attire and lack of mounts. Furthermore, Baum himself, though a veteran of European wars, spoke little or no English, relying on French or translators to communicate with his British loyalists and Canadian contingents, which could be a significant problem during combat. Their expedition departed from the British camp near Fort Miller around August 9th. Progress was slow, hampered by the terrain and heavily equipped dismounted dragoons. The element of surprise, which is vital for any raid, was quickly lost. Along the way, Baum's men skirmished with small American patrols, capturing prisoners who revealed that maybe there was a substantial militia force gathering to oppose them. On August 14th, near Sancock's Mill, Baum encountered a detachment of General Stark's militia sent out to investigate reports of indigenous activity. Baum's troops pushed the Americans back after a brief fight, but the encounter confirmed his fears. He was facing not scattered resistance, but a formidable organized enemy. Recognizing the danger, Baum halted his slow advance about 4 or 5 miles west of his objective, Bennington, near a bridge crossing the Walloomsic River in the colony of New York. He sent urgent messages back to Burgoyne pleading for reinforcements. Faced with mounting evidence of strong opposition, Baum made the fateful decision to dig in and await reinforcements rather than retreat. Prudently, he chose to establish a defensive position on the high ground overlooking the river valley, a prominence that would later bear the name Hessian Hill. Rather than concentrating his forces, however, Baum dispersed his detachment across several key points, likely to cover multiple approaches and control the bridge. His main force, the dismounted Brunswick Dragoons and the 2 small cannons, occupied a hastily constructed earthwork fortification atop Hessian Hill. Across the Wamsick River, on a lower rise of ground, he positioned loyalists in another fortified position that became known as the Tory Redoubt. Smaller detachments of Canadians, indigenous allies, and possibly German light infantry were posted to guard the vital bridge over the river and other potential crossing points or paths in the surrounding area. Meanwhile, news of Burgoyne's seemingly relentless advance down the Champlain Valley, coupled with the shocking loss of Fort Ticonderoga, sent waves of alarm across New England. The newly independent state of Vermont felt particularly threatened and sent out desperate pleas for help. Its neighbor, New Hampshire, responded decisively. The state commissioned John Stark, a seasoned veteran, as brigadier general to lead its militia. Stark was no ordinary militia commander. He had earned his spurs fighting during the French and Indian War and has distinguished himself in the early battles of the Revolution, including Bunker Hill, Trenton, Princeton. Known for his fiery temper, but respected for his hardened skill and courage, Stark commanded fierce loyalty from his men. His reputation was such that nearly 1,500 New Hampshire men, farmers, tradesmen, rallied to his banner within 6 days, some reportedly walking out of their church services to enlist. Another crucial figure emerged from the Green Mountain State itself, Colonel Seth Warner. Warner, an early settler of Bennington and leader of the Green Mountain Boys militia, now commanded a regiment of Continental Regulars. His regiment, composed largely of Vermonters, and had recently fought a brutal but effective rearguard action against pursuing British forces at the Battle of Hubbardton, following the retreat from Ticonderoga. Though depleted, these were experienced soldiers. While the remnants of his regiment marched from their station near Manchester, Vermont, Warner himself rode ahead to join Stark, lending his experience and knowledge of the local terrain to the planning for the upcoming battle. Rounding out the American force were local militia units from Vermont itself and from neighboring Berkshire County in western Massachusetts. By the time the battle commenced, Stark commanded a formidable, if somewhat irregular, army of approximately 2,000 men. This rapid convergence of forces from 3 states, led by experienced and highly motivated commanders like Stark and Warner, created a much larger and more dangerous opponent than Burgoyne or Baum had ever anticipated. The stage was set for a major confrontation on August 15th. But nature intervened. Throughout August 15th, a torrential rainstorm lashed the valley. The downpour made any large-scale engagement impossible. Baum used the enforced pause to have his men improve their hastily dug fortifications, strengthening the redoubts on Hessian Hill and across the river. But it also granted Stark the time needed to devise a complex, coordinated assault rather than just rushing into a piecemeal attack. Simultaneously, it fatefully delayed Bremen, ensuring that his reinforcements would arrive hours too late to aid Baum in his moment of need. Had the skies remained clear, the Battle of Bennington might have unfolded very differently. The heavy rains finally subsided and the sun broke through on the afternoon of August 16th. General Stark set his plan in motion. And it was audacious, a complex double envelope designed to strike Baum's scattered positions simultaneously from multiple directions, overwhelming the defenders before they could be consolidated or be reinforced. Stark divided his roughly 2,000 militia into several columns. Colonel Moses Nichols was tasked with leading a force of 200 New Hampshire men on a wide flanking march to strike the rear of the main dragoon redoubt on Hessian Hill. Colonel Samuel Herrick, with 300 men, swung even wider to assault the Tory redoubt from its rear across the river. Other small detachments were assigned to attack the Loyalists in Canadian positions guarding the bridge and other approaches. Stark himself, with the largest contingent, would wait until the flanking attacks were underway, then launch a frontal assault himself against Hessian Hill. Before launching the attack, Stark pointed towards the enemy position and declared, "There are your enemies, the Redcoats and the Tories. They are ours. Or this night, Molly Stark sleeps a widow." Powerful message. Around 3 p.m., the American columns, moving stealthily through the woods and terrain, began their assault. The coordinated attacks hit Baum's defenses nearly simultaneously, erupting in a cacophony of musket fire that Stark later described as the hottest I ever saw in my life. It represented one continued clap of thunder. The fighting was vicious, often hand to hand. The Tory redoubt across the river, attacked by Herrick's men, collapsed relatively quickly. Many of the Loyalists and Indigenous allies, perhaps less prepared for a determined assault, broke and fled into the surrounding woods. On Hessian Hill, Brunswick Dragoons, despite being dismounted and fighting in unfamiliar territory, put up a much stiffer resistance. Protected by their redoubt, they held their ground for nearly 2 hours against attacks from front and rear. But they were surrounded, outnumbered. Their ammunition began to run low. In a final act of desperation, Baum orders his remaining dragoons to draw their heavy sabers and attempt to cut their way out on foot. Charge was futile, a tragic gesture against overwhelming odds. Baum himself fell mortally wounded. Their commander down, ammunition spent, the surviving German soldiers surrendered. Baum's expeditionary force had been shattered. Just as the echoes of the final volleys against Baum's dragoons faded, a new threat emerged from the west. Lieutenant Colonel Heinrich von Bremann's relief column, which was delayed by the previous day rain and the difficult roads, finally arrived in the battlefield late in the afternoon. Bremen commanded a substantial force of roughly 550 to 650 fresh German troops. He arrived, however, not to reinforce a successful raid, but into a scene of chaos, with Baum's command utterly broken. Stark's American militia, victorious as they were disorganized. They were really in no condition to face this new challenge. They were scattered across the battlefield, tending their wounded, securing hundreds of prisoners, gathering captured weapons and supplies, and probably celebrating their hard-won triumph. This left them vulnerable. And it was at this critical juncture that Colonel Seth Warner and his regiment of Green Mountain Boys arrived on the field. Numbering about 350 men, Warner's troops were Continental regulars, so they were more disciplined and experienced than many of the militia, and crucially, they were relatively fresh. Warner, who had helped Stark plan the initial attack, now took effective command of the second engagement. He rallied the weary militia and skillfully deployed his own regiment to meet Bremann's advance. The battle flared anew as Bremann's Germans clashed with the combined force of Stark's militia and Warner's Continentals. The Americans initially fell back under the disciplined volleys of the German regulars before Warner's men stabilized the line. The fighting continued fiercely as daylight began to fade. Bremann's men fought hard, but they also faced determined resistance. Reeling from the scale of Baum's defeat, uncertain of their enemy's true strength, and themselves running low on ammunition, Bremen ordered a retreat. The Americans pursued relentlessly, harassing the retreating Germans until darkness finally brought the long and bloody Battle of Bennington to a close. The Battle of Bennington, encompassing both engagements of Baum and Bremen, resulted in devastating loss for the British and their allies. American losses, in stark contrast, were remarkably light. Reports indicate around 30 killed, 42 wounded. That means a total of roughly 72 casualties. For General Burgoyne, the defeat was catastrophic, not just in numbers, but in the type of soldiers lost. Approximately 207 were killed on the field. An astonishing 700 men were captured by the victorious Americans. While exact figures for the wounded are unclear, they were certainly significant. In total, Burgoyne lost nearly 1,000 men from this single failed expedition, a staggering blow to his already strained army. A large portion of the killed and captured were trained German regulars. These were professional soldiers, difficult if not impossible for Burgoyne to replace while isolated deep in American territory. He also lost a significant number of his loyalist auxiliaries, who were either captured or dispersed, dashing hopes of substantial local rebellion. Perhaps most damaging in the long run, the defeat shattered the confidence of his indigenous allies. Most of them abandoned his army in the following days, depriving Burgoyne of his essential eyes and ears. These scouts were crucial for reconnaissance in the wilderness. Bennington didn't just reduce Burgoyne's numbers, it crippled his army's capabilities. If you've enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe to get future content, and as always, have a great day if you want to.